This morning there were some students who greeted you as you came in. Justin offered a prayer for us. Janet is going to read scripture for us. We're giving thanks for the many students that are involved in the life of this congregation. You might not know this. We are an anomaly in the United Methodist Church when it comes to the number of students that are involved here. When I talk to my colleagues across the denomination, across the nation, and talk about the work we do here at Suncrest with college students, they are shocked and often don't believe me because it's that surprising. And I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful for the students that are here with us on a weekly basis. I'm grateful for the ways that God uses them to help us dream dreams of a better society. Whether it's a mat for people who need a place to sleep, whether it's conversations about making sure that people have enough to eat. Yesterday we sold coffee in the parking lot and raised $60 to buy socks for people who are living outside this winter. There's this constant refrain of thinking about the ways we make the world a better place, and I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful that we at Suncrest get to partner with the Wesley Foundation and the work that we do here. And so thank you for your continued support of that, for your continued support of the Wesley Foundation and the work that Beth does. I think Beth, who leads the Wesley Foundation, went across the parking lot to make sure college lunch is ready. She's right there. She was there, so I lose her sometimes. We're grateful. As I thought about Student Sunday, I'm going to be honest with you, I remembered this story. For the last 19 years, I've had the same stress dream. And I know it's 19 years because I know where it came from and how it became a reality in my life. When I was a freshman in college, my first semester, I had an 8 a.m. math class, and it was not a class that I was interested in or wanted to go to. It was not a difficult class, and so on a regular basis, I skipped it. I just didn't go. That was really out of character for me and not something that I would recommend because for the last 19 years, that has haunted me. On a regular basis, I dream that I wake up and realize there's an exam in my math class that I haven't been to in several weeks. I run to the classroom, the professor hands me the exam, and it's just barcodes, and it doesn't make any sense. I dream this on a regular basis. If I would have known the number of times I was going to have this dream, I would have gone to math class. It's just that simple. Somebody said to me, well, you should go back and learn math. It's not that I didn't pass the class. I got an A. It's just that it haunts me. It just haunts me. Sometimes the anxiety that we feel in life comes from something we did, like skip math class. Sometimes the anxiety we feel in life, though, is so much bigger than that, isn't it? There is this deep sense of unknown and uncertainty that we all face, that we all experience. There are moments in life where we all have those dreams that stress us out, those moments where we know that things around us aren't quite right, that the life that we are living isn't what it needs to be, and that there is pressure and anxiety and uncertainty that seems to be crashing in. We live in a world that seems to be full of it. Over and over again, I feel like I hear the stories of things that are not right, of institutions that are crumbling. We hear about the church not being what it's been. We see the government and the country not being what it is. We see deep polarization and separation between people. We see concerns about the climate and the environment, and it seems like this anxiety just pounds down on us and takes a deep hold. We live in a world that works in fear. We hear fear being tossed out by our leaders and by the news and by the media and on Twitter, and it seems like fear is this defining voice of our day. And as we succumb to fear and as we succumb to anxiety, we live with this deep uncertainty. I feel it. I'm sure that you feel it too. There's moments when the anxiety and the unknown just seems to take place. It's why I find this passage, Philippians 4, to be so refreshing in moments of the unknown. Because we hear Paul, who's been writing to the Philippians, come to this point, and Paul has written a bunch of things to the Philippian church. It's only 4 chapters, but it's full of all kinds of wisdom, as Paul focuses on joy as the theological tenet of this book, as Paul calls the people to a deeper and more joyful life, a deeper and more joyful existence. He reminds people of the work that Jesus has done and the life that Jesus lived. He calls us to a different kind of life, and even in that moment, make sure that there is a conflict that's in the church that's being addressed. In just the verses before we read this morning, Paul is addressing a conflict that is dividing the church in Philippi. The church in Philippi is experiencing a lot of external pressure and fear from those on the outside. Christianity is taking hold in Rome, and there's some uncertainty about that. There's internal fighting and pressure from leaders of the church, and Paul writes them this letter. And so when he comes to the end of chapter 4, he writes them this: rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. And I'm sure as the people who are sitting in this living room in Macedonia, reading this letter from Paul, hear this call to rejoice, they say, yeah, you don't know what we're going through. Do you ever want to say that as you read this passage? Sure, but you don't know what I'm going through. You don't know what I'm experiencing. You don't know the life that I'm living. You don't know the stress that I face, the anxiety that's present. You don't know. Except then we realize that Paul, who writes this letter to the church, is in prison, facing likely trial that will probably lead to his death. He's been imprisoned because of his faith and his unwillingness to stop preaching the good news of Jesus. Paul, who writes in Philippians 1, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Which of them I shall choose, I do not know." That Philippians 1:21 I read when I was young, and I remember it still. That there's something that Paul understands, that living in this moment is a deep connection to Christ, but dying means going home to be with Jesus, and that's just as good. Paul writes this letter and calls the people to rejoice in the midst of deep anxiety and unknown. The joy that Paul calls us to is radically different than what we know in the world. You see, sometimes I think we confuse joy and happiness, and what Paul is inviting us to is countercultural, because it's not about happiness. It's not about feeling good. It's not about having the things we want. We become so obsessed in our culture with being happy, right? Marketing tries to remind us that we need to be happy, and if we just have this stuff, we'll be happy. We have it in our founding documents, don't we? We are living for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? This is part of the thing that's been endowed to us as citizens of this great country. Yet what Paul is calling us to is not happiness. Paul is calling us to joy, to this deep sense of joy that is not rooted in what we have, that's not rooted in circumstances or situations, that's not rooted in the life that we've lived, but instead is rooted in this deep sense that God is with us no matter what we face. That God is present with us as we walk each day, that there is a deep sense of longing and yearning for things to be different than what they are, and this deep vision and hope that somehow they might be. Joy is hope and faith all wrapped up into one. It's the foundation that we stand on when things get rocky. It's this sense that this is not the end of the story. Have you ever met someone who is deeply joyful? Who lives a life that is so deeply connected to Christ, that understands that no matter what they face, God is with them? Have you ever lived a life that is so deeply full of joy? There are people who have crossed my path that I am grateful for because they remind me what it means to be joyful. There are people who have lived that out for me, and I'm thankful for them. Paul reminds us that the joy that we can experience is not rooted in our things or our stuff, but the joy we experience is rejoicing in the Lord. Rejoicing in the Lord. And this joy leads us to a point of revolutionary patience. There was a South African poet, Breyten Breitenbach, who wrote this: "It is not enough to rail against the descending darkness of barbarity. One can refuse to play the game. A holding action can be fought. Alternatives must be kept alive while learning the slow art of revolutionary patience." While learning the slow art of revolutionary patience. You see, joy doesn't change things, but it holds on for the long haul, reminding us that things can be different. As we face a world of anxiety and unknown, may we be people of deep joy. Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. And then he says, let your gentleness be made known evident to all. The word gentleness is not a word that we're used to, but as you look at it in the Greek, it can mean several different things. One of the things it can mean is compassion. Let your compassion be made known evident to all. Paul is calling us in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of fear, in the midst of external threats and fightings within, to be people of deep compassion. Now, church, I think that we've lost an understanding of compassion. I think that sometimes we've become so concerned about our own self and our own process and our own place that we've lost what it means to be compassionate. That we've lost what it means to hear the stories of the other. That we've lost what it means to understand the perspective of someone else. That we've lost what it means to care deeply for those people around us. One of the things we do here at Suncrest is we have a social work student, an MSW student, who is assigned here as her field placement. She helps us as we work with folks who come in needing assistance, whether it's for rent or electric or food or gas. You might not know this. We literally give hundreds and hundreds of dollars every month to people who are struggling to make ends meet. You support that with the Pastor's Help Fund. We distribute that to people who come in. And the social work student helps us do that. She helps people connect to other community resources. And sometimes I feel weird having a social work student that reports to me because I'm not a social worker, right? I don't know the tenets of social work. I didn't study social work. But I think the thing that I can teach her and that I hope to teach her is what it looks like to be compassionate. Is what it looks like to practice compassion in all situations, to hear the stories of someone else, to sit with them in moments of uncertainty and grief and fear, to understand the dignity and worth that they bring. I hope she can learn from us what it means to be compassionate. Because I hope as the people of God, we understand the call to be compassionate, to care for something that's bigger and beyond ourselves. I think it's interesting that Paul says, let your gentleness be made known evident to all. May the compassion you practice be so lived out that the people around you might see it and experience it. Paul is calling us to be people of compassion, not just inside the walls of the church, but to live out this compassionate life in everywhere we go, in every place we live. Paul's calling us to step beyond ourselves into deep compassion that cares for the other. Now, friends, if you know anything about the United Methodist Church, you know that in the coming days and months, there is significant anxiety and uncertainty for the church. And the temptation in this moment, the temptation in moments of scarcity and unknown, is to collapse in and to say we're going to worry about ourselves in this moment. But Paul's call to us as people of compassion is to allow our compassion to be made known evident to all. To continue to be people of deep generosity, to continue to care about the needs of the other, to continue to step beyond ourselves, to not be caught up in the lives of scarcity, but to remember God's deep compassion that we might be compassionate people. What would it look like for you to base your life around compassion? To be open to the other? What would it look like for you to be someone of deep generosity and care? Paul's invitation for us in moments of anxiety and uncertainty is to allow the compassion that God has put in us to be reflected to the world around us. Paul goes on to say, be anxious about nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known unto God. Paul says there are moments in life when we're going to face deep anxiety. There's moments in life where we are uncertain and afraid. Paul invites us to pray. Now, I don't know about you, but in the moments in life where I feel so anxious and uncertain and afraid, I sometimes struggle to find the words to say. And there are moments in life where I am anxious and uncertain and afraid, and I struggle to find even the words to pray. So here's what I've learned to do. I've learned to rely on the prayers of those who have gone before me, the prayers of the saints that have been prayed and continue to connect me to something bigger than myself. I've learned to rely on the prayers that have carried power and continue to carry power in my life, in the lives of those who have prayed them for years. I learned the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And throughout the day, when I'm faced with those feelings of anxiety and unknown, throughout the day when I'm faced with uncertainty, throughout the day when I feel overwhelmed, I find myself praying that prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Because in that moment, I am somehow deeply connected to God. I'm reminded that God is at work in the places that I can't control. I'm reminded that no matter what I face, God is with me. What's the prayer that you pray? What's the prayer that you pray in those moments where life feels so overwhelming you're not sure how to go on? What's the prayer that you pray that invites God into the situations that need to be changed? What's the prayer that you pray? As we seek to be people who find peace in an anxious world, we do so because we are connected to God's deep longing, to the deep joy that God has to offer. We do so as we are people of compassion who move beyond ourselves to offer grace and generosity to the world. We do so as we pray, inviting God into the situations that we cannot control and giving thanks for the ways that God is at work. May we be people of joy and compassion and prayer.